Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Shevuos Mem Tes, Shevuos 49. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, Matzal for the Shmuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and it's Eis Tzara. We're going to start today's daf is Mem Tes, Mem Tes, Shevuos, and this is the Baruch Hashem, the last chapter, the last daf of the Masechta, and tomorrow we begin Avodah Zarah. So we thank Hashem for giving us the strength to complete this Masechta together, and we daven that we can have the opportunity to do many more Masechtos together. So the Torah discusses in 4 passages the law of a shomer. A shomer is somebody who is a watchman, who is watching somebody else's property. And there are 4 basic shomerin. They are the shomer chinam, the one who watches for free, the shomer sachar, the one who's hired, the one who is the socher, the one who's paid, and the shol, who's the borrower. So we've already learned about the shomer in Baba Metzia. So nevertheless, our tractate is going to repeat many of these laws here because Rashi explains, because he wants to tell us about whether or not they're liable to take an oath, under which circumstances. And this Shevuos HaShomer is one of the 3 biblical oaths. Where the Torah tells us to take an oath by Shevuos Eid Echad, which there's 1 witness, by Moed B'Mitzvah, a partial admission, and by Shevuos HaShomer, if the person whose object you're watching says you broke it. So the Daf Yomi tells us, we start with the Mishnah, Mem Tes Amud Aleph, Arba Shomer. There are 4 types of watchmen. Gemara is going to say, actually, there are really only 3, but for now we say there are 4 types of watchmen. Who are they? The shomer chinam, one who watches without pay. The nishba, the shomer chinam v'ashol, the one who is the borrower. The nosei sachar, the one who is paid, v'asocher, and the renter. Shomer chinam, the one who watches for nothing. So nishba al-kol. The Mishnah is going to review all of these laws before we go into the laws of the carbon, whether or not they're required to bring a carbon. So the shomer chinam, it says in the Mishnah, it swears on everything. What does that mean? Shomer chinam is only liable if he was negligent. So therefore, no matter what happens, he could take an oath that he wasn't negligent, and then he would be exempt from having to pay. The borrower pays for everything, meaning to say, the borrower is always going to be responsible, even for an accident. It's actually not completely correct to say that the borrower is responsible for everything. There are a couple of cases where the borrower is exempt. If it was Baal Avimo, if he was working with the owner, and also if it was Mesa Machmas Malachta, if it died in the normal course of using the animal that you borrowed, then also the borrower would be exempt. But as a basic rule, the borrower pays for every circumstance. The nosei schar, the one who is paid, such a person, and also the renter, they're in the same category according to the author of our Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to discuss that. Nishbain ala shvura, they take an oath that if it was broken, vala shvuya, vala mesa, they take an oath if it was broken, if it was captured, or if it died. These are cases of an ones, a total accident. The hired worker is responsible for theft and loss, but he's exempt for a total accident, which is the broken one, the captured one, or the death. And so therefore he takes an oath that it wasn't stolen or lost. And Mishalman es aveda v'esakneva. But if it was theft or loss, then he has to pay for it. So now the Mishnah is going to get into the categories of why we get into a category of what's called the carbon shvua. So if the shomer makes a false claim to be exempt for paying, and he swears for it, and afterwards he admits that he swore falsely, aside from the value of the object that he has to pay back because he lied about having basically being not responsible for the other person's object, he also has to pay him back the principal plus 1/5, and also he has to bring a korban asham that he swore falsely. This is what it says in Vayikra Parakeh. Nefesh kisechato ma'ala ma'al b'Hashem chlesh b'misol b'gadol v'nishbal sheker v'yaki yachata v'ashem v'yeshiva sagzila was b'gadol asher hofkat ito v'shilem oso b'rosho v'chamisha so yosef alav. He has to pay him back the value plus 1/5 plus bring a korban asham. But as our Mishnah is about to make clear, this obligation to bring a korban only comes for an oath where there's a denial of money, meaning to say only where the shomer exempted himself from having to pay as a result of this false oath. But if he takes a false oath and he doesn't exempt himself from any payment as a result of the oath, then he doesn't have to bring the korban shvuah. Then he doesn't have to bring the korban shvuah, the korban asham. So the Gemara says, let's first go over the cases where he is not obligated to bring the korban. Let's say a person says to the shomer chinam, where is my ox? And Amar lo, mace. He says, your ox, it died, meaning to say he's exempt because it's an onus, but really it was a different type of onus. Lusha nishbar o nishba, but really it was a different type of onus. And the Mishnah is actually very wordy here, so it goes into excruciating detail. Oh, nignav o avad. Also, these are cases where he'd be exempt. He says it died, but really it was stolen, in which case the shomer chinam would still be exempt. Nishbar, if it died, Lusha mace, oh nishba, oh nignav. He swore it broke, but it really died, or was captured or stolen. Oh avad. Or nishba, if he swore it was captured, Lusha mace, or nishbar, or nignav, oh avad. Or nignav, if it was stolen, Lusha mace, or nishbar, or nishba. He swore it was stolen, but really died, or it was captured, or broke, or it was lost. Or avad, he swears it was lost, Lusha mace, or nishba, or nignav. And meaning in all these cases, he swore something that it got destroyed in a different way than it was. But in either case, doesn't make a real difference because in both cases, he's exempt. Mashbiachani says, I make you take an oath about this. And he says, okay, but Amar Amen, Pater. In all these cases, he's going to be exempt. Let's say he says, why is he exempt from the korban? Because he didn't save himself any money as a result of this korban shvuah. He says, Heichan shori. He says, where is my ox? Amar lo, Eini Odeya. He says, where's my ox? And he says to him, I don't know where your ox is. Matasach, what are you talking about? And really, he had Evusha Mesa Nishbo Nignavo Avad. He says, I don't know where your ox is. But really, he had it and it died from an onus. So he would have been exempt anyway, or he died for any of the reasons they would have been exempt, not through knowledge, not through negligence. He says, I make you take an oath, and he says, Amen. In all these cases, he's potter because he didn't save himself any money. Heichan shori. So next case, but now we're going to talk about where the shomer chinam is actually chayev for a korban. He says, where's my ox? He says, I lost it. He says, okay, he takes the oath. But the witnesses testify, no, that really the shomer chinam was responsible in this case. The witnesses testify that he actually consumed the animal, mishalim esakaren, so then he has to pay back the principal under those circumstances. He has to pay back the value of the ox. So, because under those circumstances, since he ate it, he's considered to have done shlichas yad on the pikadon, and he has to pay back the value to the owner. But if he admits it on his own, hodam me'atzmo, he admits it on his own, that witnesses don't come and say that he actually ate it, then basically, if he denies it under oath, if he says, in this case, and he says, I lost it, and they said, and he takes the oath, and the witnesses say that he consumed it. So that's called shlichus yad on the pikadon, and then he has to pay back the value. But if hoda me'atzmo, if later on after he swore under oath that the ox, he didn't know anything about the ox and really had consumed it, but then he admits it. So then under those circumstances, hoda me'atzmo, if he comes along and admits it on his own, misham karen v'chomesh v'asham. He brings the karen, the chomesh, and the asham. He pays back the principal, and then he also pays back the 1/5 plus he brings the carbon asham in order to achieve the carbon, because there he really was chayiv and he denied it under oath, and then he admitted it, so that's what he does. So next case is, hold on one second. So I just want to point out that it's specifically in a case where he admits it on his own that he swore falsely that he has to pay back the 1/5 plus the carbon, and meaning to say that the carbon and the 1/5 they only come as a result where a person admits it and repents from his wickedness and wants to achieve atonement. And so there it says, as we see from here, that these are only coming where a person swore falsely and he wants to achieve atonement. And that's a point that Rashi makes. The Rambam says, we learn from this that from the fact that it says Vayaki Achatav Hashem, that this is speaking about somebody who returns on his own. And in Hilchos Ksela, the Rambam writes, the reason is because the Chomesh and the Asham are coming as an atonement. So therefore, they only come if he admits it on his own, but not if witnesses come and come along and testify against him. And even though we have, generally speaking, have a principle, the person is not allowed to self-incriminate. Ein adam mesim atzmo rasha. And so therefore, how can we say in this case, when he admits it, that he's going to be held responsible? We say that with respect to a payment of money, a person is believed to incriminate himself. It's just like a criminal offense, or like something that he would get lashes for, or execution. Then we don't believe him. But with respect to payment of money, we do believe him to say he owes money. So now we're up to the next case. Heichan Shori, if he says, where is my ox? And he says, Amaro Nigna, if he says it was stolen, Mashbiacha, and he says, I'm going to take an oath. Amara Edim, Me'idim Oso. The witness says, we testify about him, Sheganvu. So this is what's called Toin Tanas Ganav. He claims it was stolen. And this is the case that we had in Baba Kama. It's called Toin Tanas Ganav. And so he claims it was stolen, and then witnesses come and say that he actually was the one who stole it. So then they have to pay Tashlum Kefil. Then this person claims it was stolen, has to pay double. That's the halacha of Toin Tanas Ganav. He claims it was stolen, and therefore he's exempt. And it turns out that he had it the whole time. He pays double. That's learned out from the pasuk in Moyi Matzei Aganav Yishalim Shneim L'Re'eu. Meaning to say, if it's not like he said that it was stolen, but he himself was the one who took it, he pays double. And this law only applies if he takes an oath for his claim. So anyway, back to the text of the Mishnah. So that's why it was stolen. Mishalim Tashlum Kefil. He pays double the value of the ox. But if the witnesses don't come, but he admits it on his own, Hodom Me'atzmo, he admits, he says, I swore falsely. Mishalim Karen v'chomesh v'asham. Then under those circumstances, he pays the Karen, the principal, plus the 1/5, plus the carbon asham, because he himself took it. So if the witnesses come there, he pays double. Amar le'echa b'shuk. So now we just have a general rule about somebody in the marketplace who says, "Where's Heichon Shori Sheganafta? Where's my ox that you stole?" V'omer Woganafta. He says, "I didn't take your ox." Ve'edim Iso Sheganvo, and the witnesses testify that he indeed did steal it. Misham Tashlumi Kefil. He has to pay double. But Tabach Umachar Misham Tashlumi Arba Chamisha. But if he slaughtered and sold it, he pays 4 or 5 times the amount. Next case, Ra Edim Shemem Mashmashin. Let's say he sees the witnesses are running after him, Ubayin, and the witnesses are about to come and testify about him in the court that he stole it. And he runs to the court and says, Amar Ganavti Avalot Tavachti Macharti. He admits that he stole it, but he says, I didn't slaughter or sell it. Edim Masham El Karen. So this is, he only pays there at the principal. We know that this is a machokes, in Baba Kama, actually, because Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon argues on this, and this is the case of Moda B'Kanas V'Achach Ba'Edim, where you admit to something, and then the witnesses come after the fact. So if you admit to a kanas, you're exempt. But if witnesses come after the fact, That's a dispute whether or not you're liable. So now we're up to the next case, which is the borrower. Till now, we're talking about the shomer chinam, who generally speaking would have been exempt for everything except for negligence or misappropriation. But now we have the borrower, Amar L'Shoel. Let's say the person says, so the borrower, generally speaking, is chai for everything. Heichen Shor, he says, where are my ox? Amar Lo, and the borrower says, mace. He says it died, in which case he would have been chayiv anyway. Lusha nishbar nignav. Oh, avad, or he claims it was lost, and nishbar. Oh, excuse me. If he claims nishbar was broken, lusha meis or nishbar nignav. Oh, avad, or nishbar he claims it was captured. Lusha meis or nishbar nignav. Oh, avad. Nignav lusha meis or nishbar avad. Avad lusha meis or nishbar nignav. In all these cases, he claims something which, anyways, even though he was lying, he's not exempting himself by making this claim. He's just saying something that's not true, but he's not exempting himself by the claim. So the person says, Mashbiachani v'amar mein pater. Then he's going to be exempt from the carbon shvua because he's anyway chayiv to pay back. He's anyway liable to pay back the person the amount of the object he was watching. But let's say he says, Heichon Shuri, where's my ox? Amrlo any odea. I don't know. Ma tastach. I have no idea what you're talking about. And really, he was watching it. Vushameis or nishbo nignavo nevad. Mashbiachani v'amarmein chayv. In that case, he's liable because in that case he claims he had nothing to do with it. But really, so he was trying to get out of having to pay. So then he admits it. He has to bring the carbon shua, the carbon asham, plus pay back the principal plus 1/5. Now we go up to the hired worker. Amro knows he's sachar or the sochar, or the renter. He says echon shari. Amro mace. He says it died, which is really an onus, and so he would have been exempt. But really, usha nishpa, but it died in a different way. I mean, it was lost in a different way, so it was also an onus to be exempt. Or nishbar, usha mace or nishpa, or nishba, usha mace or nishpa nignav, or nishba, or nignav, usha avad, or avad usha nignav, mashbeachani v'amamein pater. In all these cases, he's lying, but he's not changing the status of whether or not he'd be liable or exempt as a result of his lies. So therefore, he's going to be exempt from the carbon. But let's say he says mace, let's say he says he died, or nishba, but really it was stolen. So he said v'usha nignav. If he says it died, in which case he'd be exempt, but really it was stolen, in which case he'd be liable. In this case, in that case, is liable. Avad or nignav, if it was stolen or lost, v'usha meis or nishba mash b'yachani v'amar pater. In all those cases, he's going to be exempt because in that case, it was an onus, so he'd been exempt. So, excuse me. In that case, if he says avad or nignav, if it was stolen or lost, if he swore that it was stolen or lost, but really it died, so he would have been exempt. So he swore falsely, but he's still exempt because he's not trying to save money as a result of that oath. And after the Mishnah gives all these examples, it gives a general rule called Mashana mechova l'chova, miptur l'ptur, or miptur l'chova pater. If you change your oath, if as a result of your oath, you're just changing it from being responsible to another case where you're still responsible, or exempt to another case where you're still exempt, or you claim, or you were really exempt and you swore falsely to make yourself responsible. In all these cases, you're exempt from the carbon shvua. But but if as a result of your oath you're taking it from a case of obligation to a case of exemption, then you're going to be chayiv. Then you're responsible. So the general rule is, says the Mishnah, whoever takes an oath to be lenient on themselves is exempt, but whoever takes an oath to be lenient on himself will be liable because he's trying to get out of paying money, but to be strict on himself will be exempt. So the Gemara asked the question, Man Tana Arba Shomrim, who's the author of the Arba Shomrim? He didn't say, who's the one who says that there are 4 watchmen? So Amar Nachman, Amar Abula, what are you talking about? That he says this is the position of Rabbi Meir. It's the position of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the one who says that there are 4 Shomrim. Generally speaking, when we have an anonymous Mishnah, we're going to assume it's Rabbi Meir anyways. So what's even going on here? What's the question? So he says, no, the question is, of course, there are 4 watchmen. Is there anybody who doesn't say there are 4 watchmen? Obviously, there are four watchmen. It's a basic law. So is there anyone who says there are not? So this is what I'm saying to you. This is what I'm saying to you. Mantana da amar sochar can also say sachar dami. Because we categorize the hired worker with the renter. So who is the one who says that they have the same law? Who is the one who says that they have the same law? And basically, who is the one who says that the renter is going to be considered not like a shomer chinam, but like a hired worker? So Amar Rav Bar Avua, this is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the one who says that the shomer sachar is the equivalent. The hired worker is the equivalent of the renter. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, but didn't Rabbi Meir teach us the opposite? The Tanan. Because we learned in the Mishnah, or actually we learned in a Brisa, we changed the text to say we learned in a Brisa. Brisa says, Sochar Keitza Mishalim, how does the renter pay? Rameir Omer Kashomer Chinam. Rameir says the renter is not like a Shomer Sachar, but he's like an unpaid watchman, the Shomer Chinam. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kenose Sachar. Rabbi Yehuda says that he's like a hired worker. So according to the Brisa, Rameir says that the Socher is not like the hired worker, but he's like the Shomer Chinam. So how can you say our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir? So Rabbi Bar Avua Ipchatani. Rabbi Bar Avua had the exact opposite reading of the Brisa. He switched the attributions to Rabbi Meir and said that was Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda was Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why do we see that there are four Shomrim? Hani Arba, Avu Shlosha. But why do we see there are four? There are really three, because there's really three categories: the Shomer Chinam, the Shomer Sachar, and the Shol. We're just not sure which category we put the renter in, but he's really just one of those three categories. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak, Arba Shomrim v'dinei and Shlosh. And there are four Shomrim, but they make up three separate categories, three separate laws. So now we had all these cases in the Mishnah. We said in the Mishnah, all these cases where the person swore falsely, but he wasn't swearing about money. In all these cases, it says he's exempt. So Amarav, the Chuan Pturin Mishvuas Shomrin, yeah, sure, they're going to be exempt from Shevuos Shomrim. They're exempt from the carbon Asham of the Shomrin, but they're Chayav and Mishum Shevuos Bitoy. But they're going to be liable to bring a carbon Chatas because they swore falsely. And this was the case we had at the very beginning of our Masech. To come full circle, where we start off with that if you swear falsely, you have to bring a carbon Chatas. So, because it states, "Vayaki Hashem achas mi'elav hisvada asher chata alav ve'vias Hashemo Hashem al chataso asher chata nekeva menatzon kizbo usirati zim l'chatat chiper alav michataso." And this is what we said at the very beginning of our Masechta. It's what's called the carbon or the yored, the variable offering. So anyway, So Rab says, yeah, he's exempt from the carbon of the Shomrim, but he's allowed to bring from the Asham, but he's liable to bring the Shevuos Bitoy, the carbon for the Shevuos Bitoy. Shmuel says no. Shmuel says Af Peturin Mishum Shevuos Bitoy. He's exempt from the Shevuos Bitoy. He also doesn't bring that carbon, the carbon chatas. Gemara says, "B'mai kamiflagi." What's the source of this? What are they really arguing about? Shmuel Savar. Shmuel says, since this oath where you said, I was basically said it was the animal was captured when it was really was stolen, like insignificant distinction in that category. But nevertheless, it can't put it in the future because you can't say that the animal will die or will not die because he can't fulfill that. So therefore, even when he swore about the past, you're not going to be liable for a Shevuos Bitoy. Whereas Rav Savar, Isa B'Lavain, Rav says, since you could say this oath with what's called the lavahin, yes or no. Like you could say it was stolen or was not stolen. Therefore, you're going to be liable for a Shevuos bitoy. This was the Gemara that we already had in our tractate. We had this discussion. Didn't matter because we learned, and we had this back on Daf Chafei. The Gemara says, didn't we already have this discussion? Didn't matter because we learned Shavuos Shazar Ploni Tzor Yam. Let's say a person takes an oath that this person that somebody else threw a rock into the sea, or Shavuos Shalozara. Rav says he's chayav because you could say it about the past, yes or no. Shmuel Amar Potter. Shmuel says it's exempt because you can't say that about the future. Rav Amar chayav the isa b'lavahin because you could say yes or no. Shmuel says it's Potter the leisa b'lava because it doesn't apply to the future. So therefore, you're not going to be liable for this chatos. So why do we need this argument in both places? So Gemara says Tzricha, we need it in both cases. The Iyashmin and Baha, because if we just had this case with respect to throwing the stone into the sea, Baha Kamarav, in that case, Rav says you're going to be chayev there, Mishum Diminav Shekameshtaba, because he's swearing on his own. But in this case over here, the Beidina Mishtaba, the court is what's making you take the oath. So maybe he agrees with Shmuel. Rabbi Ami, like Rabbi Ami taught, Rabbi Ami calls Shvuos Dayana Mashpino, so in Chayiv and Ella Mishum Shvuos Bitoy. Rabbi Ami said if the Shvuos Bitoy needs to come on your own, and if a court makes you do it, you're not going to be liable. So maybe Rab would agree in this case, like Shmuel, that you're exempt. If we only had the case of the stone, if we only had the case of the Shua Shomer and Bahal Kamar Shmuel, maybe their Shmuel says you're exempt. But maybe in the stone, maybe you would agree with Rav that you're liable. So tzricha, we need to be in both cases. Gufa. So let's analyze this principle. So anything which the oaths, which the judges make you take an oath about, you're not going to be liable because of Shuas Bitoy. Because it states, "O nefesh ki shavar v'atebes v'sayim." If you take an oath, me'atzmo, he has to take the oath on his own. And what's the reason? What does it mean? Ki si shava? Ki the Reish Lakish. The word ki, Reish Lakish explains. The Amar Reish Lakish ki mishtamish ba'arba lashonos. Ki means I dilma eladaha. Can mean if, perhaps, but, and that, or since. And so since kisi shava can mean if, meaning if you take an oath, and not something that you're obligated to take an oath from the court. And so therefore, Rabbi Ami says if it's a shvuas bitoy from the court, you're not going to be liable for a shvuas bitoy because the court made you take the oath. It has to come on your own. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar Amar Kulan Peturin Mishvuas Shomrim. All the chayavim mishum shvuas bitoy. So he says all of those. Rabbi Lazar's position is. Remember, we said Rav says you're going to be liable for shvuas bitoy. Shmuel says you're exempt from shvuas bitoy. Now we have a third position, which is Rabbi Lazar. He says they're exempt from the carbon from the shvuas shomrim, but they're liable mishum shvuas bitoy. Chutz, the exception of the case of the Eini Yodea Ma Tasach, where the person says, I have no idea what you're talking about. This show of the borrower. The borrower says, I never borrowed in the first place. And then he admits that he borrowed and also the case of Gneva Veda, Denosi Sachar, Vishev Bisochar, or if the hired worker or the renter, that in both of those cases, Shulchayev, he's going to be liable, Sharikah from Mammon, because he rejected the money. And so therefore, it's considered to be like a shvu of a denial of money. And so therefore, he's going to be Karban Ashan. So Rabbi Lezer is teaching us that he's exempt from the Shvuas Bitoy in that case. And it's going to be a Shvuas Shomer. He's only liable for one carbon. Look at Rashi. The Katani Buba Masisan Chayev. Who Chayev is Shvuas Shomer. He's liable for Shvuas Shomer Shari Kafram Mamon because he rejected the money. Okay. Hadran Allah Arba Shomrim Shevuos. We're going to, God willing, repeat this at 8 o'clock. We'll do a siyum this afternoon, and also really on Shabbos, we'll do a siyum. Baruch Hashem, Shkoyach, or maybe Zocha to do many more Masechtos. Shkoyach.